Welcome to Living with Dr. Monica Shah, where we discuss different ways of living our lives and finding fulfillment in a world that often pushes a single version of success, timeline, and identity. Living fully means honoring your truth, and charting our own path on a road less traveled can feel hard. Whether you've chosen a non-traditional life or life chose it for you, this show is here to support your journey and remind you that you're not alone. My next guest is Dr. Kiki Fehling. I met Kiki at our annual professional conference of the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. She spoke on a panel about spreading knowledge and tools in diversified ways as a psychologist, something that's important to me too. And our later discussions were part of my process in finally starting this podcast. Kiki is a licensed psychologist as well, and an expert in dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. As a human who has personally struggled with mental health difficulties, she is passionate about making evidence-based mental health tools accessible to as many people as possible. Towards this goal, she regularly posts on social media through her account @DBTKiki, and she is the author of 3 books: Self-Directed DBT Skills, DBT Cards for Coping Skills, and the LGBTQ+ Mental Health Workbook, coming out in June of this year. In speaking more with Kiki, I learned that she has diversified her life both professionally and personally. For example, deciding to leave work and live on a sailboat for a year. She's done these things not because she is a natural risk taker, but because she is not. As a self-described people pleaser, she has intentionally pushed herself out of her comfort zone. Kiki shares about how the life path she expected has been shaken multiple times, leading to big changes in perspective and out-of-the-box thinking, and the challenges of maintaining that perspective when back to the structured, real world. We dive deep into psychological principles and tools for challenging internalized norms, overcoming fears, and living an out-of-the-box life. This episode is rich with insights. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Kiki. Nice to have you on.
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. So Kiki and I met at a conference, and when we were talking about all the different ways that you use psychology in your work and the various kind of out-of-the-box ideas for applying psychology, I was so drawn to that. And then when we got to know each other a little bit more and I heard more about your story, I found that there were many out-of-the-box ideas that you've incorporated into your life. And I think you have so much that you can share with all of us. So I'm really glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like my career out of the box stuff was one of the first things that pushed me to do personal life out of the box stuff. So it's funny that it came off that way to you as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd love if you could start with just sharing a little bit about your life and your story and, getting more into some of those out of the box ideas.
Yeah. So I guess up front, I am a psychologist. So that's how we met. I'm a therapist. I specialize in a therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And at this point, a lot of my career is atypical in that I'm not currently seeing clients, but I suppose we can get to that. And it's worth first just describing where I come from, who I am in that way. So I grew up in central Pennsylvania in a fairly conservative, definitely privileged culture and family and a background, and then very kind of stereotypical high achieving. Like I went to private school, I went to boarding school, I graduated and went to an Ivy League, and then I went to a PhD in clinical psychology, right? So lots of academic achievement there. And I was someone who had always kind of done my best to check boxes and to do what was expected of me and to high achieve. Like it's things that I felt personally and intrinsically motivated to do. I do love psychology, but there was a lot of following like the prescribed path of how to be quote unquote successful. So I will say that a lot of my life was really defined by my concern or thoughts about other people's perceptions of me. And then in my last year of graduate school in clinical psych, I, at age 29, suffered a heart attack very unexpectedly. And the way that something like that would, it really disrupted a lot of my life, but in very painful ways, but very nice ways too, very helpful in that on one hand, it caused me to completely slow down. I had to leave internship for a full month and then come back super slowly. So all of a sudden I couldn't work on my dissertation. I couldn't see clients. I could do nothing except rest. And also almost dying makes you really reevaluate everything.
Yeah.
And I really looked honestly at how I was spending my time. And it was very obvious to me that the most important thing was spending time with my loved ones. And that started a shift in me of moving away from research, which I was very focused on at the time in that academic high achieving way, and
Yeah.
moving to clinical work, which I did find more intrinsically fulfilling. Over the next few years, as I started to practice therapy, the pandemic happened, which then also upended everything and it disrupted the ways in which I thought life had to be, right?
Right.
The way that you practice therapy, the way that you spend your time, the people you connect with. And so once again, I was really forced by my life story to look honestly at like, how do I want to spend my precious time and energy? Around the same time with the pandemic, lots of people were getting on TikTok, and I was not one of them at first, but I ended up reading an article about how many people were using TikTok for like Google to get their medical information. So I finally got on, started talking about psychology there, really liked it, and people liked it that I started doing that more. And that was another thing that like I never expected. So
Right.
just like all of these things in my life started happening to force me to review my expectations for what I wanted my life to be. And I will say at the same time, I was working with a lot of LGBTQ clients, and my conversations with them in DBT, where we're trying to think about how can we help you build a life worth living, and really actively fighting against the like cishet expectations that people have for you and what that life would mean and should mean, helping them think that through and challenge the stigma and the biases and the expectations, then helped me do that myself.
Yeah.
And it was at that point that I decided to quit being a therapist and move to live on a sailboat with my partner. We both quit our jobs after saving up enough money and lived on a sailboat traveling around for 10 months. And it was something I had never sailed before in my life, so it was terrifying, but it ended up being one of the best things. And around that time, starting clinical work, I started writing more, I started speaking more, being on social media more. And now my life, I'm back on land, living in Western Massachusetts, and my life is still super psychology focused, but not seeing clients, as I said, doing that kind of dissemination stuff and out of the box in that way. But the sailboat really, beyond being something I never expected to do, also taught me so much about so many things that really have influenced my life now of really trying to mindfully make my daily lived experience precious and what I want it to be. So that's some of how I got here.
Yeah, right. So you've had multiple times where you've kind of been following one path and then had some experience that shifts and, makes you think about life a different way. I'm wondering if you can speak more about what that was like. Let's say the first time it sounds like it happened when you were going along that very hierarchical, kind of structured academic path, right? Like this is what leads to this and that leads to that. And that's just what you do and what you follow. And then you really like jumped paths. What was that like?
Yeah, I like the way that you phrased it there. It definitely resonates with my heart attack. It's like such a big deal that everyone in my life, their expectations for me changed, right? There was no longer any question that whether I was going to come back into internship or not, whether I was going to be working on my dissertation, after a heart attack, the recovery is so much that it was literally tiring for me to walk around my apartment, like that level of physical disruption too. And so everyone's expectations for me, including my own, just were automatically completely different. And I think about the concept of post-traumatic growth that people talk about when they've been through a trauma, of the ways in which maybe they wish it hadn't happened. And now that it has, there can be a lot of gratitude for it. And this is one of the things that definitely resonates with me for that of I'm so grateful for the ways in which it made me stop, made me slow down, made other people let me slow down, like gave me permission in all of the emotional logistical ways to find that new path. And so, as I said, I'm very grateful for that. And I think what it did help me realize is some or a lot of the expectations are still like in my mind more than anything. And it can make it easier to have an excuse to make a big step or to make a big change, but that
Mhm.
it's not actually necessary sometimes. And it's more like our own barriers in our own head that are getting in the way of making those decisions that would be better for us. Not
Mhm.
always true, right? But partly. And so I think that was an experience that, even though it was an external excuse and explanation that was
Mhm.
really helpful, it did teach me the ways in which life can change and it's okay,
Mhm.
which then made it easier to make those big changes later.
Right, right. Yeah, and often it takes something really big like that to shake up people's ideas of how they're living. And isn't it
Yeah.
interesting that it also did that for the people around you, right?
Yeah.
Like it kind of takes something like that for everybody to stop and be like, wait, why are we doing it this way? And
Hmm.
why do we have this expectation of you, right? Like the expectations were released.
Yeah, 100%. And then that happened on a large scale with the pandemic, which I
Mhm.
think further created movement, not only for me, but other people, my other friends and things like that, or how they view themselves, how they view me as well.
Right. Yeah. The pandemic shook things up for a lot of people,
Yeah.
definitely. You spoke about the expectations and how, for you, even, they were still there. Because yes, an external event can shake things up for you. And sometimes you still do have those internal expectations and societal messaging around you. So I'm curious. Do you feel like you still have some of that in you? And, if so, how do you navigate all of that?
100%. I'm really glad you asked that, because I do think often, like on social media, there will be people who will talk about, like, just change it up, do what you want, like, let them, like, all sorts of things, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
And the lived experience has been a huge shift in, like, I don't know, a decrease in shame and people pleasing, a decrease in fear, like all of these things that would make it easier to act within my own intuition and not care what other people think. But I
Mhm.
absolutely still care what other people think. And it's a thing that I'm constantly working on. So, something that I've heard other people say, and does seem to be true for me too, is there are certain stories that
Mhm.
are stickier, including that internalized heterosexism or
Mhm.
sick sexism, like the kind of societal cultural stuff
Yeah.
that I'm definitely still working through.
Can you speak a little bit more about what that is, just so that, everybody's on the same page?
Oh, yeah. So the idea of, let's go with heterosexism. So that's just another term for like homophobia or queerphobia. And that is stigma based on like the societal assumptions and beliefs that being gay or queer or bi is bad or negative or wrong in some way. And
Mhm.
so there's these cultural messages that create stigma, heterosexism, and
Mhm.
expectations about people should be or are naturally, quote unquote, straight, cis, etc. And if you hear those messages enough from your culture growing up, you can internalize them. You can start to believe them yourself. And that
Mhm.
is the internalized heterosexism bit.
Right. And then there's also cis and het expectations that you mentioned that
Yes.
we've internalized, we project onto others. And the idea is that there's one that is the way, and then everything else is not the right way. Is that
Right.
what it is? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like that you are supposed to get married to someone
Yeah.
of the opposite gender, that
Mhm.
you are supposed to be the gender that you were assigned at birth, that
Yeah.
you have kids, that you like all of those things, that you get partnered, let alone married,
Yeah.
also.
Mhm.
So, all of those pieces of what your life is supposed to look like, according to cultural expectations, is a part of that narrative that we internalize and kind of don't even, we have blinders on often and don't notice it.
Yeah.
And I guess to be explicit, this applies to things besides gender and sexuality too. Like this applies to race and class and religion and all the other kinds of areas where people might be stigmatized, but
Mhm.
also expected to be certain ways.
Right. And that's the issue. It's again, it comes back to expectation because those expectations then box people in.
Yeah, and it's bigger than these categories, identities, classifications, right? Because then for folks who aren't watching, like I am a white person, and a white person in central Pennsylvania is
Mhm.
going to be held to different cultural expectations than a white person in Louisiana or from
Mhm.
outside of America or something like that, where it's bigger and intersectional and beyond just these specific identities. But there are expectations given to us that, whether we are aware of them or not, are taught to us, and then we start to believe.
Yes, definitely. You mentioned that in working with your LGBTQ plus clients, yourself were shaking up your own expectations for yourself and what you see. So can you speak more about that?
Yeah, I love that we're talking about this because we didn't talk about this in our initial conversation in email, and it is a huge part of the story for me. So in DBT, the therapy I specialize in, the overall goal is building a life worth living. And the therapy is very explicit and focused on that not being a judgmental term. That's something that every client, every individual gets to define for themselves.
Yeah.
What is the life I could live that would give me most joy, meaning, and fulfillment? And so as I would work with all clients, but especially the queer and trans ones, to define what does that life look like for them. A
Hmm.
lot of times you would come up against the like, oh, wait, do I actually want that? In
Yeah.
the cishet expectation way. And
Yeah.
then that would kind of trickle out to the rest of their lives and helping them over and over see the way that that normativity and those expectations were influencing them and then challenging it, like kind
Yeah.
of put it in my face how that was true for me too.
Right.
And so helping them, like they helped me. This is one of the beautiful parts of a
Yeah.
therapist. I think that's not uncommon.
Definitely.
So there are so many different ways, as we said, for there to be expected paths and then to break them. But queer people, I think, are so often kind of forced off of the expected paths in the typical life ways because of who they're attracted to, who they want to partner with or not partner with at all, who
Hmm.
they want to have sex with. That then sometimes when they realize that and they accept that about themselves, it can free up them to be like, wait, if I'm not following that path, I don't have to follow other paths. And they can be
Yeah.
queer in different ways. But not always. It still is a hard conditioning to overcome.
Yeah, it really
Or
is.
you might want that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like just opening up our minds and our hearts to all of the different possibilities, right? And that's the main thing. Like looking at, is it something that I want, that I'm choosing? Why do I want it? What is important to me about that? Often people don't stop to kind of reflect on those things. And like you're saying, in the LGBTQ plus population, with people who are already, for reasons outside of their control, doing things that are different than the norm, then it's like you're looking at all of it with a critical eye, right?
Yes. Yes. And for some reason, the way you just described that made me think about, again, because it's beyond these kinds of marginalized identities as well, of like in my clinical work, I worked a lot with folks struggling with PTSD
Mm.
of various identities and experiences. And there was a thing my colleagues and I would often talk about of when you would go through PTSD treatment, which is often about seeing black and white, all or nothing thinking and then challenging it
Yeah.
and coming out the other side being more flexible in your thinking and more like in touch with what is true for you. It often can lead to people breaking up with their significant others or making big life changes in the same way of like, if we practice being more flexible, if we practice touching in with ourselves and trying to connect with that inner wisdom for whatever reason, it can create flexibility in all sorts of other areas that we weren't trying to be flexible in.
Yeah, it's shaking up the prescribed paths, right? And
Yes.
looking at all of that and seeing, what do I want to take from this? What do I not? And yes, sometimes the external events help you to do that, kind of give you permission. And something that we can do, like we can exercise on our own, even without having some external event to shake us up.
Absolutely. And I feel like with a lot of folks I've worked with, actually this played out to be true in my personal experience too, of like a lot of times it might be just realizing I'm like stuck in a rut or I
Mm.
don't know what I want or just feeling
Right.
whether it's stuck or bored or something
Yeah.
or just very anxious about doing something different. Even taking small steps, whether it's for me, like getting a tattoo was a big deal, or like cutting my hair a different way, or for someone else, it might be just like ordering something different at the coffee shop,
Yeah.
just breaking routine and holding it lightly because you may not like it, and that's okay. Just treating things like playful exploration and
Mhm.
experimentation is hugely important to like get to know yourself better, but then build a muscle of not doing things the way that you or other people were expecting you to do.
Definitely. Yeah, it reminds me of these mini day-to-day exposures to uncertainty that
Yeah.
when there's kind of a fear of the unknown, sometimes you get locked into certain patterns, right? Like you take the same route to work every day, you order the same thing, like you just tend to fall into these patterns that might feel comfortable, but can also just propagate this fear of the unknown. So
Mhm.
those day-to-day exposures can help you kind of break free a little bit from that.
Yeah. And so it's like fighting exposure and challenging fear. And it's also in my experience with clients and myself again, just trying new things. We can get so stuck in, oh, I would never like salsa dancing, but then go to the class and make sure that's true. You might
Yeah.
be surprised.
Right, right. And yeah, maybe you feel like you look a little silly, or maybe you don't catch all the
Yes,
steps, and you can still have a good time. So it's just
totally.
shaking it up, shaking it up. Yeah, you don't always
Yeah.
need the big external life events to do that.
Yeah. And I do think so some of the big changes I made after the heart attack were easier because of the external event. But
Mm.
then the moving on to the sailboat only happened because I had been kind of playing around with in smaller ways before
Right.
that in my personal life.
Yeah. So can you speak a little bit more about how you were playing around in your personal life in the smaller ways, and then how that led to that seemingly bigger sailboat decision?
Yeah. So I would say one of the bigger ones was like the getting on social media. That might not seem like a big deal to people, but like it was a big deal for me. I'll just put it at that. And so even just making that first video and then making videos and playing around with like I really love pop music. And so then making videos where I'm lip syncing to pop music and then talking about DBT skills on them, it felt
Yeah.
really scary and silly, but then it was really fun. And so I kept doing it.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were just talking about, right? It's like there might be
Yes.
a little bit of fear of what is this going to be like? This is going to feel a little awkward. And, maybe it does, and it can be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and this will probably speak to the ways in which, as I said, I was very like protected and conservative growing
Mm.
up of like the tattoo. And if you can't see me now, my hair is purple. That's newer. But so years ago, it was wearing more brightly colored clothing and just wearing things I wanted to wear
Yeah.
rather than being worried about what other people thought about it. I don't know, just daily lived experience, trying new restaurants. I don't just trying to be more fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then that led to making this bigger decision with the sailboat.
Yeah, it did. I think because that like grew my muscle for not listening to anxiety and shame, which was necessary to get to the sailboat decision and
Mhm.
everything else.
Right. And that piece about you mentioned others' expectations have been a weight for you for many
Hmm.
years. So I
Yeah,
imagine that probably came up for you when you were making this big shift to living on a sailboat.
totally. And even that was a really interesting lesson because I remember telling my family, my two parents and my brother, I told them my partner and I were doing this, and they all were like, all of them, their reaction was like, oh, cool. Like they weren't surprised. I was like, what?
Oh my God.
Like, what? To me, it was like this groundbreaking thing. And
Yeah.
I think it was because I don't know how they would say it, but I think the adventurousness that maybe I didn't see in myself, they had seen in me growing up. But I
Yeah.
also think it was the heart attack and the pandemic of seeing the ways I'd already made changes and that they made changes too with the pandemic that I don't know. I don't even know if it would have been different 7 years ago before a pandemic or not.
Mm.
But it was a really interesting lesson to see that what I expected them to think and feel about this huge decision for me
Mm.
ended up being just like, nice, really cool, good for you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because sometimes the weight of expectations from others that we perceive is a weight that we're putting on ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was a big takeaway for me. And of course, that wasn't true with everyone in my life, like
Yeah.
even my clients, for example, or some of my coworkers. It's not that they weren't happy for me, but they were more anxious for me or more judgmental, depending on the person. And in a different context or a life circumstance, that decision would have been way more impactful. Like my partner and I didn't have kids at the time, or we still don't have kids, and that kind of thing, or we weren't caregiving anyone besides
Mhm.
ourselves. So obviously there was privilege in that, in being able to shake up in a way that didn't immediately impact someone else's life. But that's where it's just about in my head, the emotional expectations I thought people had for me.
Yeah, right. And those prescribed paths of
Yes.
like, this is what you do, this is how life should go, right?
Yeah. And even I do think this is relevant of I'm 37 now. And so we went on the sailboat. I guess I was about 34, 35. And people did bring up kids and
Mm,
things like that. And we're like, we don't want them. Like, we know that right now, at least.
yeah.
So let's do this thing and break it up in that way.
Right, right. Yeah, it's tough when this has come up with other guests as well, where you're both contending with the expectations that you're hearing from others and their questions and their doubts about things, but also your own internalized doubts. And so
Yes.
you're both trying to start a new path or explore with curiosity other things, other ways, and having to kind of stay strong in something that you believe when you're not even really sure if you believe it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Oh, that's so hard. Yeah. That makes me think about gender and sexuality identity too, and some
Mhm.
other kind of invisible identities folks can have around like disability or neurodivergence, like the things that can be more invisible and internal, and like being confident in the decision you're making, or making the decision even if you're not confident, or just like owning your truth for what it is right now. It's hard.
Yeah, yeah, it is hard. And it can change, right? It
Yes.
I think maybe that's part of the process too, is recognizing that, okay, this is what I'm thinking and feeling right now. And it's okay if I don't know 100% that this is the way that it's going to be forever.
Yeah.
But that can bring up a lot of uncertainty, which can be hard.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's really true. And not inherently, but I think a lot of people learn this more as they age because they see the ways in which life is unpredictable and it changes. But
Right.
that is where I'm really appreciative for learning DBT and getting into meditation,
Mm.
where you're really forced to grapple with the idea of like, we can't predict the future. Do I even know who I am right now? My thoughts of who I am right now are not the same as they were 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Seeing that and recognizing that helps to, in this moment, remember that and loosen whatever
Mhm.
identity or desires you have right now. Like, that is true for me now, and it wasn't true before. It might not be true in the future. I can
Yeah.
act on it now, even if it's not true in the future, because it's true now, but it still offers a bit of lightness. So meditation has been a huge part of this for me too, for sure.
Yeah, the other thing with dialectical behavior therapy that I find really helpful in navigating like different life choices is the idea of dialectics, right? I find that comes up so much. Dialectics being this concept that two things that might seem like opposites can be true at the same time. And it really helps us to widen our perspectives on life, on ourselves, on others. And the way that we think often and the way society's messaging comes at us is very black or white, right? It's either this or it's this. It can't be both
Mhm.
together. But I'm curious, have dialectics been helpful to you in navigating your path?
Yeah, 100%. I think, especially in the context of what you just described of the synthesizing two opposite things can be true at the same time being the core dialectical principle, there are other dialectical principles, including change is constant that you brought up,
Yes.
and everything is interconnected. So, all of those three principles have
Yeah.
been immensely powerful and important for me to make these changes or to take these leaps of faith or to trust myself, because I wasn't expecting to talk about queerness so much, but like, I identify as bi and non binary, inherently messing up some of that all or nothing black and white language.
Yeah.
And then if change is constant, I gives me safety or some security in my lived experience, at least, to in a moment when I want something, even if I'm not sure I'll want it in the future, or if I understand it's different than what I used to want, I
Mhm.
can still move towards it because I want it now, and it's okay because things
Yeah.
change, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I'll still mindfully consider, will I regret this tomorrow or something like that? But that's different than just being honest about what is it that I want right now.
Right. Yeah. And I've reflected on this idea that sometimes when we have like a prescribed path and we think, okay, this is the next step, now this is the next step, it can almost feel easier because you, in a sense, you know what to do next. Whereas when you start to open up your mind to all of these different ways of living and realize there are actually no rules, it
Mhm.
can feel pretty overwhelming because
Mhm.
you are open to so many possibilities. So, how do you decide what you want? And then that's where this other concept that comes from DBT, wise mind, connecting with your inner wisdom, becomes important too.
Yeah. Definitely. I think it also brings to mind the way in which life is really hectic and stressful
Hmm.
for a lot of people. Like a lot of people have a lot going on in a lot of different ways that make it legitimately difficult or legitimately scary to change something. And the staying on the path, like continuing to work towards partnering in a law firm or continuing to become an attending as a physician, like some of these high achieving paths that are super stressful and long term academic paths, even if you're miserable or even if you're just a little uncomfortable or don't like something about your situation, it's so much easier to just keep going
Yeah.
because it's one less thing you have to problem solve and figure out.
Hmm.
So I do also encourage folks who are listening, if that kind of describes them in any way, to like have some compassion for yourself of you can still make that choice and just stay in the lane, whatever that means for you.
Hmm.
But I think the first step is just being aware about whether that is a part of your experience of, am I choosing this because I need to right now, radically accepting my circumstances? Or am I staying in this lane when I'm miserable because it's just what I've been planning to do and what other people have expected me to be doing?
Yeah. And you also don't have to act on anything, right? In that process of becoming more aware,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to leave your job or, make a drastic change, go live on a sailboat, right?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to do something like that, but even just having an awareness of, I'm really not feeling fulfilled. Is there anything that I can do in my control here to shift things up? And maybe
Mhm.
that means, yeah, it's not in my control right now. It doesn't feel accessible to make a big change. So, are there other things that I can do, right? Like, can I try to incorporate things that I do feel more fulfilled by?
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to see think about burnout too, of just you're exhausted sometimes and making even small changes is hard. We don't have time to talk about this and I can't get too prescriptive, but that is where DBT, compassion focused therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, like these things can help folks break it down and you can start to get some control or some sense of stability and sense of control despite the fatigue, the burnout, the chaos around you.
Yeah, definitely. So, we've already spoken a little bit about some challenges that you've experienced in leading a life that kind of looks different. And I'm wondering, are there any more that you can share and how you've moved through them?
Yeah, I don't mean to like brush it off with my answer because like one of the biggest ones is just logistical and financial. Like making big moves like that can be very difficult. And
Okay.
so I want to like highlight that as a challenge that I had to very actively problem solve or plan ahead for. I don't think going into the details is particularly helpful, but it feels important to like
Yeah,
name.
to name that, right? Because it might not be also accessible to make big
Right.
changes and lead a life that looks, very different. It's a kind of privileged place to be. So
Right.
that's important to name.
Yeah. And so, but then from there, I'd say the other biggest challenges are the ones that we've kind of talked about a little bit, but to name them explicitly is just fear
Mhm.
and then shame, which is like fear about social rejection too, in a way, if you think about it, the people
Yeah.
pleasing kind of thing.
Yeah.
And for me, I actually think this is a nice place to talk about it because I just mentioned DBT, ACT, these therapies. For me, being a therapist, helping clients do these things, but then learning the
Yeah.
really concrete skills that help with them was hugely useful. So in DBT, for example, there is a skill called opposite action,
Yeah.
which is exposure, like you mentioned earlier, seeing an emotion that's unwanted or unhelpful for you in some way. And then in order to reduce that emotion, you act opposite to what it's making you want to do.
Mhm.
So in fear, it's usually we want to avoid something or run away from something that's scary because our emotion tells us it's dangerous.
Mhm.
And for shame, it's usually an urge to hide the desire or hide ourselves or do what we need to do to avoid other people's negative judgments, whether real or perceived in our heads. And so opposite action means approaching the feared thing, doing the scary thing, doing the thing that you really want to do, even if other people might judge you for it. And in my case, a lot of my anxieties and fears and shames and people pleasing emotions and urges were either not based in fact, like they weren't actually dangerous. I did not have negative consequences from getting a tattoo, from going to a salsa class, from going to like these things we talked about, right? And then it ended up, as I did more, I also learned that other people judged me less than I expected them to. So in that way, like that really specific skill and experience is what allowed me to do those things and then let me mindfully learn from them oh, this is okay. I can do this and people might judge me and I don't actually care as much as I expected I would.
Yeah.
Or the thing that I thought would be problematic for me in some way, specific or not, wasn't. And
Right.
so that looked different at different times, but that really was the core of what I did over and over to start making these changes.
Yeah, it's giving yourself different information, right? Like, so it was uncomfortable, but I was able to handle it. Or,
Yes.
yeah, maybe people didn't actually judge me as much as I thought that they would, or they did, and I was able to move through it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And then in that point, I can make a decision that's much more wise
Mm.
about will I do that thing again or not?
Yeah.
Right? I can make that decision based on what I learn.
Yeah, with more data, right? And avoidance just teaches us that it's too hard for us to handle. Like, it's too much. We can't do it. If you keep avoiding the thing, it just, creates this cycle of not being able to learn that you might be able to handle it.
Yeah, really well said. And I think that's where approaching it like playful experimentation or exploration, like I said, is so key. No matter what the emotion or the barrier is, like you do something that you've been avoiding for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you get to discover whether it was actually problematic, whether it was actually hard, whether it was worth the hard or not, etc. Right? So it's just gaining a muscle and learning more information to let you know whether to do the thing again or not.
Yeah. And those two things, like the shame, the fear, those things can work together quite often.
Yes.
With the shame, I'm curious what that process was like. Like, was it similar to the opposite action, or I imagine it might have been more involved?
Yeah, I'm definitely, as a therapist, I've definitely been trained in a more behavioral way. So, like, you know what that means, and some listeners might know as well. It is very action based. I
Yes.
do things that I'm ashamed of in order to act opposite and discover what's real, right? Judgments, courage, etc. And I do think that for shame, there is a lot more, arguably still behavioral, but deeper work of maybe practicing self-compassion, of exploring where did this internalized stigma or deep shame, or where did these stories about myself come from like a developmental or childhood standpoint.
Yeah.
And for me, that is where meditation was really helpful, and like somatic work of getting, this is where you kind of lose behavioral language, but getting into the body and working through stuff, not at a cognitive level.
Yeah.
And that's where opposite action can be really helpful because you're doing and learning actively, but it's often bigger than that. I'm sure you've experienced this as a dancer, like literally just dance by itself sometimes can be a treatment, quote unquote, for shame, like an experience of self-knowledge, self-compassion, self-connection.
I'm hearing also this research that's come up more recently around, like, yes, of course, exercise can be helpful for addressing depressive symptoms, but it's been found that dance, particularly as a subset, is the most helpful. And, we can hypothesize why that might be. There's this connection maybe to the music, or what it's like to move your body in a way that is in flow. These are all kind of hypotheses, but it was interesting to read about that research.
That is really cool. I hadn't heard that, and I'm also not surprised to hear it. I mean, the other thing that I think is true from research and lived experience is the ways in which, like, collective movement can be so healing, whether it's a dance class or going to a protest even, or going to church, singing in a group, like things where you're with other people doing something that's embodied. And the thing about dance, I don't know, again, tell me if this resonates with you, is when you're dancing, especially to music, even if you're alone, there's like a sense of interconnectedness because it just, I don't know, it's so human to me. Of like, people love to dance and people dance, and like music is so interconnected and powerful that I'm even curious if that's a part of the benefit from a depressive standpoint.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, dance does so much for me, even if I'm in a studio by myself, which I will be later today.
Nice.
It's really just something about listening to the signs and intuitions that your body is giving you towards movement, and it could be done in silence too. Like, it doesn't even have to be with music. But there's something that's really special about just listening to the cues of your body. And for me, it really helps me kind of get out of my analytical brain and just drop into another sphere. Psychology really helps me practice my analytical, kind of more cognitive self. And then dance is something that's more physical and emotional.
Yeah, 100%. I think dance as like a form of art Also, because art in general, you get out of your head and into your body more. And that's a different thing that we're not used to in today's modern world most of the time.
Definitely. So you've mentioned people pleasing, and I know that's a term that gets used a lot. And I find sometimes its meaning kind of gets lost in the discussion of it. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more, both from your personal experience, but also as a psychologist about this concept of people pleasing.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. And I would be interested to hear your definition too, because when I say it, I am often talking about it the way that I experience it. But I do think it can really differ based on what is underlying it psychologically for folks or developmentally. So when I say people pleasing, for me, that's where shame and anxiety and fear are really connected. If I'm being honest and looking at it really deeply, often in the moment, it is fear of me being bad as indicated by someone else rejecting me for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And people pleasing in a really concrete way comes from these like macro, but also micro moments of not wanting the person across from me to think negatively of me, like really broad. And that's what makes it so insidious, I think. And I imagine the way I just described it, at least in some way, will resonate with other people who feel like they struggle with people pleasing, but it can come down to like being scared to say no, being scared to ask for things that you want,
Yeah.
either because you're worried about inconveniencing other people, burdening other people, or just having an opinion at all and feeling like people might judge you for that. I think especially women and people conditioned as girls are used to considering other people's needs. So I think people pleasing is usually like downgrading my own needs, values, desires, and wants in order to prioritize other people's needs, values, desires, and wants. Sometimes in ways that we're doing for them ahead of time. We might try to read their minds and keep them happy in a way that we're not even aware of the ways in which they're truly experiencing a given moment. And then prioritizing other people over ourselves as like a default. Because the point isn't to also always prioritize yourselves. Like that's not particularly communal and interconnected and effective. But it's about finding that balance and recognizing, now this is the antidote to people pleasing in some ways, but recognizing that like you are worthy of compassion just as much as the people around you, and then holding yourselves dialectically balanced in that way.
Yeah, and something I've thought about with people pleasing, and I think this is sometimes the caution when these terms get used in pop psychology too, is the meaning gets lost, right? And sometimes those terms get used almost too broadly. So from what you described, that very much sounds like it can become an issue when it's interfering with your ability to value yourself, express and communicate when you've been hurt or when you need to set a limit or when you need to say no. These are things that are really helpful to learn and develop into. But I think the caution comes in when we start to use people pleasing for every situation where we might be thinking of others. Because, like you said, we are social beings. We are living within communities where it can actually be very effective and functional to think of other people and not just yourself. And so that's where my issue with that term comes up, is when it's used so broadly and in a way where it really highlights the individual as the problem, right? Like I'm a people pleaser and that's something I need to change without questioning, okay, well, what are the values within this context of both me, the individual, and my community?
I love the way that you just said that. And I agree that I do think people pleasing can be misused at a cultural level, the exact way that you're describing. And it speaks to kind of a general cultural trend that I think is happening now, even around conversations about like toxic friends or narcissistic parents. And to be clear, there are parents who have narcissistic personality disorder or narcissistic traits that abuse and mistreat their kids, right? And there's like a swinging culturally that feels a little bit kind of like what you're describing of if someone hurts me, if someone makes me angry, does something offensive, there's like an immediate cutoff. And or regardless of what other people do, I need to prioritize myself because that's self-love. And I think for me, it is, I'm so glad we're talking about this because it's another place where dialectics have been so key. As someone who has struggled with like pendulum too far the other way of prioritizing other people's needs, a few years ago, I was swinging in some ways back towards the other side of
Mm.
like prioritizing mine and then needing to come back dialectically to prioritizing both
Yeah.
somehow, right? Of like recognizing the interconnectedness too of I am an individual who is a part of the whole.
Mm.
Like I am a part of the collective, both my family, my social group, my town, my country, the world, recognizing that it's not just my needs that are relevant and they're super important.
Yeah, and there's sometimes where doing things to please others will be okay. It doesn't all have to be painted
Yes.
with the same brush. I'm wondering for you how you distinguished between the two, because that can, I think, be a challenge for people sometimes.
It's a great question. And it's probably, again, where like the experimentation comes up of trying to increase mindfulness of both the moments when you have to make a decision that's about my needs versus someone else's needs, or where it doesn't have to be a versus, but just like there are multiple sets of needs here, multiple people here,
Yeah.
and then making mindful decisions. It may not be this cognitive to be clear, but like this time I'm going to do this. And then afterwards, how does that feel? How does it feel to tell my friend no, both in the immediate moments after, but also an
Mm.
hour after, a day after, a month later, and just keep experimenting and see how it feels. And then I think also increasing and practicing a loving kindness and compassion for other people who are doing the best they can and being honest when they've hurt me, right? Being very mindful of that bi-directional feedback too.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that it is such a nuanced process of experimentation and seeing how things feel afterwards after you try out a behavior that you're maybe not used to.
Yeah.
And it's not so black or white that I am a people pleaser and that needs to change because it's bad.
Yeah. I don't think an identity term for that kind of thing is helpful for anyone. Like
Hmm.
we're all kind and we're all unkind.
Yes,
We're
yes, yes.
all selfish and all
Yeah,
selfless. It's just
yeah.
about how are we acting and can we then be more mindful about acting within our values, whatever that means in a given situation.
Right. We're all just made up of so many components, and the use of terms like toxic or narcissist, those can become so overused in our culture in a way
Hmm.
that's very black or white and very, canceling of people. And you can meet somebody who is like selfish and that they think of themselves in a way that has hurt you, and they cannot be a narcissist in the clinical sense.
100%. Yeah. And also just like BPD and other mental health diagnoses, the person may be narcissist and then not at another time, right?
Yeah.
We're all constantly changing again. And
Right.
that's where like identity labels in the way we're talking about of actually in any way, but especially in ways like people pleaser or toxic, just
Mhm.
aren't helpful for you or other people.
Yeah, I agree. So, in our earlier conversations, you talked about what led you up to the decision of living on a sailboat for a year and the idea of why do we take retirement more near the end of our lives? I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because I don't actually think I said that out loud here. We talked about that before we started recording, and that was a huge part of the decision for my partner and I. And I think for my partner, who's always been a little bit more adventurous and working in tech, I think that idea has been in their mind a little bit more than for me. But for me, I think it's very related to my heart attack too, of seeing the ways, again, that shit happens. And like, you don't know what your health is going to be, and not in a doomsday way, but just life changes and your body changes. And even the way I've heard disability activists talk about it's not disabled and not disabled, it's disabled and not currently disabled.
Mm,
Like, we don't know what's going to
yeah.
happen. And so that idea of taking time purposefully to stop work and do something besides work, quote unquote, I guess earning like a steady high income, whatever that means to
Yeah.
you, felt so important to me to
Mhm.
try to do if I could afford it. That's why I did wait. Like I had to wait a few years for financial reasons. But I think it was more like trying to be alive while I am and
Mm,
experience something that sounded interesting. So again, that part of exploration and even the way that we just talked about identities, like people pleaser, there's something that's been very interesting in the past few years since sailing of like when it comes up with someone, sometimes when they don't know me, a question will be like, oh, did you grow up with a sailboat? Are you a sailor? They'll be like, is that a thing that you were before
right.
that?
Yeah, like they need to track it. Like, how did this happen?
Yeah. And they really will say, were you a sailor sometimes? And it's like, no, objectively, I was not. But in some ways, I still don't feel that way. And so I don't know. I think that's another place where identities or expectations can just keep us from doing things like taking breaks from work because we're not retirement age, whatever
Yeah.
that means, can
Yeah.
get in the way.
Yeah. And when you start to think about it and actually examine it, it's like, well, why can't I do that now? If
Mhm.
I'm able to, what is it that's stopping me?
And there might be things that are stopping you besides finances,
Of course.
but it's just looking at it. Is it just that people don't do that?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just that you didn't expect to do that? Is it just that that doesn't go along with this identity that you have been holding recently? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it just that you've never done it or you've never thought of doing it? And,
Yeah.
if those are the reasons, then could there be a little bit of opening to consider it, right? Even though it's not something you've considered before.
Yeah. And so with the sailboat specifically, maybe to answer the question that people ask me at dinner parties and things, is my partner did grow up sailing a little bit on
Uh-huh.
the Charles River in Boston. So there was that experience there. I did not. I'd been on a sailboat like twice in my
Uh-huh.
life when I went on vacation with my parents in
Uh-huh.
like the Caribbean, and that was fun. But I started that year of the sailboat by going to sailing school for a week and learning the skills that I needed to survive. And
Right.
even now, the comment I made about I still don't actually feel like I can call myself a sailor because the way that I did it, I like jumped into this thing, like
Right.
trial by fire. And it's really funny. I learned by doing, and I still don't know the sailing terms that people know. But
Yeah.
that was such a beautiful part of the experience, being thrown into something new and discovering like, oh my God, I can do a hard thing that I never expected to be able to do. So that was definitely a joy, kind of gaining mastery in something that I never anticipated wanting mastery in, just knowing I could do it.
Right. And it's not necessarily part of your identity, but you took something, tried it on, learned it, was
Yeah.
able to do it, and then put it back.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what are some other joys that have come from these different experiences that you've had? I remember you talking in our earlier conversations about creativity and how some of these experiences have opened up your mind.
Yeah, I would say creativity has definitely come up in the ways in which I've gotten more into social media and writing and speaking in a way that I never expected to, of just taking this thing that I love, DBT, psychology, broadly speaking, and learning about it in a super structured, academic, adherent way, and then being like, okay, how do we
Yeah.
teach and practice and share that in a way that people without a PhD can understand, or people without a GED can still access this wisdom, because it is wisdom that's really, really beautiful and powerful. So
Yeah.
creativity in that. And then inherently, man, the way that we talked about earlier of queer people being off the cishet beaten path, then can like be creative in their life in other ways, like that has seemed to be true for me. Of like, since the sailboat, there's just been I don't know, I am dancing more, and like I love birds, and so like I've drawn a lot of birds in the
Yeah.
past few years that I would never do. I used to call myself not an artist. Like again, there's a creativity in a
Yeah.
concrete sense of making art, but then a creativity of living your life.
Yeah, I love that. Right. Because even that is an identity. Like, I'm not an artist. We box ourselves in and out of different experiences that can be so beautiful. And, you don't have to be an artist or call yourself that in order to do art or practice experiences of creativity.
Yeah, well said, for sure. And then the other biggest joy that I feel like I have to mention is the sailboat brought me back into touch with nature way more. Like, just in a really concrete sense, some of the moments on the water, I will never be able to forget them. Like, just the inherent beauty of the colors and the sound and the slow movement. Like, it's never been easier to feel embodied and present in a
Yeah.
way that continues to like nourish me when I bring my mind to it, at least. But then that has continued, even the drawing the birds, like I said, I think it's brought me closer to nature. I go on walks more. I'm more aware of my natural circadian rhythm, which is a part of nature. I'm more open. On a sailboat, you are forced to care about nature. Like the tides and wind literally determined what my partner and I could and could not do on certain days, like straight up.
Yeah.
And so there's also an increased not only awareness, but respect for nature. And so I think that's brought for me a greater awareness of weather and just a connection with I'm looking at my window now, like the trees around me and the changing of the seasons. And that's a joy that continues for me that I'm really grateful for being like so in nature on the sailboat in some ways that were very aversive at times in terms of comfort, but now I'm super just grateful for.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So living on a sailboat, you're consistently moving around from place to place. You can have a plan, but you don't really have control. That experience of being in nature also connects to the idea of change is constant, and we actually don't have as much control as we might think. I'm wondering if you can speak to what that experience was like on the sailboat, and then how you moved back into this world where it is a little bit more structured. Just curious what that transition was like too.
And not only more structured, often structured in a way that is denying the reality of nature because it can, right? Like you go to school no matter what, unless there's a foot of snow or something like that. So first off, being on a sailboat and experiencing that interconnectedness with nature and the ways in which my decisions depended on the wind, the tide, all of the things, right? Really was in your face, the interconnectedness, and then in your face, the way that change is constant. Like my partner and I would have these plans about we're going to get back to Charleston by X date. And sometimes that had to happen because my cousin was getting married in Charleston and like we had to be there if we wanted to be at the wedding. But a lot of times we just had to change our plans, like straight up. And there was an increased appreciation for the way that life is unpredictable, change is constant, and that we are impacted by everything around us, right? Like all of these dialectical principles.
Yeah.
And so on a boat, it's really in your face. There is no denying it. But right now on land, in my apartment that's in a house that isn't moving, like it's always in the same place and is predictable. And I'm protected from the elements. And I'm now acting in a world that we schedule this podcast is at 1 p.m. on Friday, right? And then you're expecting me to show up on Zoom, where it's harder to hold on to our connection to nature inherently. I think our structure is inherently disconnected. So I will say that.
Yeah.
And so I would love to say, ooh, this is interesting. My brain just went to like an identity marker. Like I would love to be a slow liver, right? I would love to be someone who embodies slow living, whatever that means. I don't make, see, in my head, I'm like, I don't make my own kombucha. I have an alarm clock. I don't know, whatever the judgments are. So it's somewhere in the middle, dialectically, of I have more things on my schedule. I have more control over what I do on a daily basis because I'm not depending on the tides. And I'm on my computer a shit ton and probably more than I want to be, if I'm being honest. And that disconnects me from nature. It disconnects me from my body rhythms and my body, like all of these things, right? And I have continued to just do my best to check in and stay mindful. And it's easier because of the sailboat. And so for that, I'm grateful. Like I do look out the window more than I think I did 3 years ago. I do go on walks more. I purposefully try to check in about, am I living my life the way that I want to? And at this point, that includes connection with nature in a intentional way.
Yeah.
But it's not easy.
Right. No. And there's no right way to do it. Like a great,
Totally.
You had the sailboat experience. So you now have some memories and experiences that you can go back to. And it will likely change when you're in a different environment. Our environments have so much influence on what we do, how we live. For me, I notice when I'm on my beach vacations, I am really good at just being present and, letting my intuitions guide me. Whereas when I'm back here in New York, I'm like a different version of myself. I am moving and I'm constantly doing different things and thinking about how to fit other things into the pockets in between. You can have both in you, and your environment can be a huge influence in bringing those parts out of you. And there can also be ways where, like you said, you can practice slower living without being a slow liver.
Yeah. And it is really hard. It's something I'm continually working on. And for what it's worth, the concrete things that have helped me are maintaining a meditation practice. But the only way I can do that is by having a sangha or like a meditation group that I go to at the same time. So like using schedule right?
Right.
And using that accountability, both self and community, to like get me there.
Yeah.
I repeatedly and purposefully take breaks from social media, especially professionally. I just am like, okay, I'm not going to be posting or engaging for a week or 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
And try to put on my schedule or talk to my partner about, like, let's go on a walk together at the end of the day. So
Mm.
again, scheduling things because that's the context in which I'm in, and then purposefully trying to find times where I'm not on my phone, where I'm outside, where I'm slowing down, whatever that means to me.
Right. To make space for that within the schedule.
Yeah, because that's reality, and otherwise it won't happen. Like cognitively, I'm sucked in too now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. So, Kiki, do you have any tips for people who might be considering going off the beaten path or might want to cultivate some more out of the box thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in a really specific way, I greatly encourage, actually, I was about to say meditation, but I'll take that back, a mindfulness practice.
Mm.
Because I think when you say meditation, people think sitting on a cushion. And I think that's great. But you can meditate through dancing, like you already talked about, even dancing in silence or with music. You
Mhm.
can meditate through walking in nature. You can meditate by just like stretching and doing yoga at home, right? There's so many different ways that you can practice mindfulness
Mhm.
that I do think that that is like a core piece of getting to know yourself better, of being aware of your emotions that might be getting in your way versus logistical things, learning how to trust yourself and have self-compassion, and then also just like building that muscle of intuition, like we talked about, the wise mind, like at a really basic level,
Yeah.
knowing what you want. So mindfulness 100% like needs to start there as to get onto a path like this. And then I think my other concrete tip would be a little less concrete, but like the playful experimentation.
Yeah.
Just explore. And that can be in small ways first and see what it feels like. And this is where the mindfulness comes in. What do I like? What do I dislike? How
Yeah.
can I get more comfortable with discomfort? How can
Mhm.
I find more pleasure and comfort and fulfillment, even in small ways, and then build it over time to learn what you like, but then also build the muscle of doing hard things or doing weird things, whatever that means for you.
Yeah.
And then find a therapist or find a good book in DBT, ACT, IFS, like whatever resonates with you. Just get into the exploration of something that can give you a new concrete way to look at things that
Mm.
is different than the way you're used to looking at them.
Right, right. And to do that self exploration and the connecting to yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
So, where can people find you if they want to see what you're up to, maybe connect?
Yeah. I think the easiest place where like everything is my website. So it's my name, kikifehling.com. But I am also on most social medias with the handle at DBTKiki. And I didn't do this on purpose, but I have written books, one of which is about DBT for folks who want to learn more about that.
Mhm.
But also, I have a new book coming out that's for LGBTQ people specifically. And it
Mm.
talks a lot about what we talked about a bit today of like exploring different pathways, especially related to gender and sexuality, and then how to be comfortable and overcome shame and fear related to that. So feels worth pointing out for any queer folks listening.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it has been such a pleasure to have you on and to talk more. I loved our conversation.
This has been lovely. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Living with Dr. Monica Shah, where we discuss different ways of living our lives and finding fulfillment in a world that often pushes one. I hope this series gives you more confidence in creating and living a life that fits you, not the mold. If you like what you heard and you're ready to feel seen, inspired, and supported in building your path, don't forget to hit subscribe. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and grow a community of people who are redefining what living means together. So please share and leave us a rating or review. You can also watch on our YouTube channel at Dr. Monica Shah and find episode notes and bonus content at www.drmonicashaw.com. Finally, follow me on Instagram at Dr. Monica Shah for more inspiration and resources. Until next time, keep living your unique life. Because no matter what path we're on, it's all just living, and there's more than one way to do it. I'm wondering, you mentioned the first one, it sounds like was when you had your health scare.
Yes.
And Okay, let me just redo that. Sorry. Um, so, so I'm wondering, the first time it sounds like was when you were following that Sorry, 1 second.
You're totally fine.
Okay. Um,
For what it's worth, I
yeah.
kind of expected with how I feel today, I was going to have to do that a few times. So this
Oh,
is
yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's totally, if you do it, it's totally fine too, clearly.
Great. Good.
In it together.
Woo.
Let me just formulate.